I'm so delighted to be here at the Philanthropy Australia Masterclass series today, delivering a masterclass on evaluating for impact. Impact is the goal. It's absolutely fundamental that collaboratively across for purpose, government, corporate and philanthropy, we find new ways to work together to really address that question of what contribution we're making to the world, what impact we're having, and how we can work in new and more ambitious ways to create the change the world requires. I am so absolutely delighted to welcome you here today. I feel very humbled actually by the fact that there are so many of you in the room, and I'm genuinely excited at the opportunity that offers us today to really think about doing things with more ambition, with a deeper connection to our purpose and to what we're trying to achieve in the world. And what I ask you to bring yourself today, and I'd love people to come forward rather than necessarily sit at the back. What I'd really love you to bring today is I'd love you to bring your hearts and most importantly, your minds, because I hope that we leave today with a different sense of what we can do in the world and how we can do it better. In starting, I had an amazing experience this year after a couple of years of COVID and negotiating a salary package that included the opportunity to go and get out in the world, and by golly, I'd encourage all of you and every one of you to do that. I sat in a room with 600 people in Chicago with the Grantmakers for Effective Organisations and an extraordinary CEO, Marcus Walton, who's been appointed to the Grantmakers for Effective Organisations because of the unique perspective he brings about racial inequality and the sorts of ways philanthropy and for-purpose organisations and others across America might work together to resolve the very deep challenges that America's facing. And what struck me about that room, and by golly, I hope to rev it up in this room today, is a whole lot of passion and commitment and anger and rage. Marcus's thing is we have to actually acknowledge rage and work from a position of rage in order to forge a new way in the future, which was sort of confronting for the only Australian in the audience. But when I saw the Chicago poet laureate stand up and spit fire and brimstone about the circumstances of her life as a queer black woman in Chicago, when I heard Marcus, I think really profoundly, and of my trip to America, this is the thing I really took home, talk about the illusion of altruism, it sort of centred me in what I'm doing and the contribution that I'm making. Because I think the illusion of altruism runs actually really true. I think that there's I promised Sarah Jenkins, my strategic communications manager, that I wouldn't get too fiery too early, but I think there's a sense of complacency. I think there's too much acceptance of sitting in silos. There's too much self-congratulation about what philanthropy and grant makers and grant seekers are doing to address the really real challenges that we face. And this illusion of altruism, I think, speaks directly to that we can talk with great alacrity about the contribution we make, about our purpose, about what we do in the world, about how we do it. But what I'd really ask you to hold in this conversation is, to what extent is there an illusion of altruism? To what extent does altruism hide a lack of ambition, a lack of rigour, a lack of preparedness to think about the spaces in between? One of the things that happened in Chicago, which I was never brave enough to do, but I'm going to ask you to do today, is if anybody says anything that you like, click. That's what happened in Chicago. Everybody clicked. A room full of people clicking. It makes you look around and think, who agrees with that? What's going on here? So I never did it in Chicago because I was too embarrassed as a larger, older white woman. But if you feel the power, if you feel the opportunity, if there's a point you want to make, please try and click. I bet no one does, but nevertheless, here we go. So there we go. Oh, I love it. Got some clicks. You see what that does? It's a different sort of thing. So as I said, before I start, can we sit in this illusion of altruism? Can we hold ourselves up to that? If you take nothing else with you before you leave the room today, I want you to think deeply about what contribution you're making to the illusion. And then, more importantly, what are you going to do to remove the illusion of altruism, to get below that bonnet? And in that context, and very deliberately, can I begin today with a welcome to country? Because I think the illusion of altruism rings true, particularly in that space. So in the spirit of reconciliation, today we all acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connection to land, sea and community. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today. So from wherever you come from, whatever place, whatever land you normally reside on, let's take a moment to acknowledge, as I said, the traditional custodians of this country. So moving on from this illusion of altruism, one of the things that I think has been absolutely most influential in reframing the way that the Menzies Foundation, and indeed other foundations that connected in other parts of work I've done, mostly through the PIP, which was the group that generated the Continuing Towards Better Practice Philanthropy report, is Michael Quinn Patton's Foundation's theory of philanthropy, which really deeply interrogates what philanthropy is, what it provides, and how to do it. And we've been talking about this tool for quite a long time, but I'm absolutely surprised how little connection to it has been made and what a profound difference it does. And it's for both, I think it's really important for both philanthropy organisations, but also for not-for-profits, to really deeply understand this tool, because it provides the opportunity to work in a fundamentally different way in terms of forging better and deeper relationships between philanthropy and for-purpose organisations. A theory of philanthropy articulates a foundation's role in supporting change, and that's pretty fundamental, compared with the theory of change, which hypothesizes how that change happens in the world. So, there was a period over the last 10 years or so where many, many philanthropic foundations did theories of change. But the bottom line is philanthropy doesn't make the change, philanthropy contributes to the change. And that word contribution, how you contribute to the change, is really significant. Many of the foundations sitting in this room, I'm sure, have all engaged in visioning processes. You've got mission statements, I don't have a doubt. You've got areas of program priority. I had a look at many of your websites before today. You engage in strategic planning. You adopt statements of values and principles. You set goals. You identify outcomes. You evaluate results. You've got administrative and human resource and communication and financial management systems. You have governance structures. You make grants. But the big question that Michael Quinn Patton asks, how do those things align? How do those things stack up in such a way that a foundation can answer the question about the how and why that they use their resources to achieve mission and vision? What connection is there between what you do on the ground and the achievement of your mission and vision? There's some of the things we're going to think about today. This alignment of internal and external systems means that it really specifically and absolutely positions the foundation in the context of the external world. There's too much in philanthropy where we look at our own internal processes. We explain what we do and how we do it by the way we make grants. But that doesn't, first of all, I question whether how much that aligns to your mission and vision, or what you say you want to achieve in the world. And it doesn't actually really get under the banner of the engine. Like, what's your approach? What's the how that you do it to achieve your mission and vision? It isn't by describing how people can apply to grants, to you for grants. It's not about small grants and capacity building grants and impact grants. There's got to be something more that you share in order to explain to the people seeking support from you the basis upon which you work, the engine that you use to connect to your mission and vision. And part of that is this fundamental connection to the external world. Unless you understand how you're trying to make change, unless you can articulate what the change is that lies at the heart of who you are as an organisation, then I'd suggest you're only going a short way in terms of what's possible to have real impact. So in Michael Quinn Patton's world, the internal and external connections constitute a roadmap for adding value in the world. So alongside illusion of altruism, can you add, what value am I adding to the world? And please, by the end of this session, don't make it be about the number of grants you make or the size of those grants, because that's not at the heart of value. So basically, Michael Quinn Patton's theory of philanthropy answers the following questions. How do we organise and operate to fulfil our mission, and why? How do we determine priorities? How do we align programmatic priorities with our mission? Once again, that link to mission. Who should we approach to be strategic partnering with and why? Whom should we partner with, if anyone, and why? Are we engaging a little too much, a little too little with grantees, and how do we know? How do we know what our grantees think about us? What kind of theory of change should we fund? Do we need our own theory of change? Why or why not? To what extent are the various functions, operations, concepts, principles, plans and procedures of the foundation aligned, coherent and consistent? If I say as a foundation that you can apply to me for a grant because I want to do systems change, is that true? Is the way that we function, the way we're connected into the world, the way we think about grant making aligned with that? And I have to say, in general, I think there is much advance that can be made in that regard. So basically, and how do our practices match our aspirations? So basically, what the whole point of this theory of philanthropy tool is, the kind of thinking has profound implications for foundations when the parts, all the parts, the things that you describe what you do, are evaluated, seen separately or autonomous as opposed in combination. And what's fundamental and what I think the real requirement for us to do is how do those parts integrate together and are embedded and integrated with the foundation as a whole? How are you actually delivering your mission? And if you're a not-for-profit seeking to engage with philanthropy, seeking to find support for grants to support you in your work, I think these are some of the questions that you should be asking the philanthropists that you're engaging with. Because in deeply understanding what lies at the heart of those philanthropic entities, you're going to have much more insight and might be much more able to shape the sort of applications that you make. And what I'm really hoping in engendering a deeper and more honest conversation about these things, it becomes clear on what basis you should expect in terms of how the process is going to be managed, what a reasonable expectation is of the grant. It's too open-ended. Do you know what I mean? I mean, I'm a grant maker and a grant seeker. I can tell you, I've written 100 applications to people to tell me they want to do systems change. And when I actually scratch below the bonnet, they have no idea about systems change. So there's a lot of words: innovation, systems change, impact. But unless you really deeply think about what you're doing and how you're doing it, unless you see or can describe what your foundation, what your philanthropy is doing, how it connects with the external world, I think there is much that's left unsaid that gets in the way of real impact. So I found it an extraordinary an extraordinary tool. It's basically 30 questions, and what it does is it asks you answer all the questions and you immediately see inconsistencies between what you think you're doing and what the tool says you're doing. So, for instance, I found it incredibly useful to understand how the history and legacy of the Menzies Foundation informed our current approach. I found it a real challenge to actually have to describe how our past created a foundation in which we had to argue for a future. I'd never had the opportunity to think about that before. I found it really important. I found it very interesting that we talked about we wanted to be innovative at the Menzies Foundation, but as a result of the tool, I had a real opportunity to ask what was our propensity for risk at the board level. Because so many foundations say we want to be innovative, we're going to create innovation, we're going to make a difference in the world, but that idea about risk, when you write about what's your appetite to risk, how do you manage risk in your organisation, how does the board think about risk, they're very useful questions that absolutely really allow you to have conversations deeply about how you think about innovation, how you practice innovation, what the lived experience of innovation is. And as I said, once again, I think some of these questions actually from a not-for-profit point of view are very interesting as well, because risk is one of the things that's absolutely fundamental to innovation. If you don't have an appetite for risk, if you don't prepare for failure, if you don't acknowledge failure, if you don't talk about what you're trying to do, then claiming to be innovative, you're sort of cutting off yourself at the knees before you even start. The other thing we found is that the Menzies Foundation very much wants to work at systems level change. But systems level change requires a wholly different way of thinking about funding, which I'll show later. If you don't fund due diligence, if you're not prepared to fund intermediary, if you don't fund the costs of building deep collaborative practice, I really ask how you can actually be instrumental in systems change. These are all the things, the in-between things, that allow you to actually genuinely collaborate for systems change. And yet there's still so many arguments in philanthropy about funding these sorts of organisations, funding these sorts of essential building elements to actually work in systems change. I also found it was very interesting that, you know, everybody wants to have impact, everybody talks about the impact they want to have, but there's still a fundamental reluctance to fund evaluation. Click! Can we have some clicks for that? Exactly right. Oh, see, that's made me very happy, because what the hell is that about? If you want to have impact and you don't fund evaluation, and not just an evaluation that's a quibble, or not just evaluation that's something that you do at the end of the project, but evaluation as a deep strategic tool, evaluators sitting and working alongside conceptualisations of what systems change or social change might look like, then you're once again shortchanging yourself. And what this tool does is it asks you to write, you look at it and you think, well, we want to have impact, but we're only spending 10% of our budget on evaluation. And those anomalies are very useful talking points to have with your board, because these all go directly to governance decisions. To what extent does the board understand that the intermediaries and those sorts of things are fundamental? And then finally, it really caused us to think deeply about how we described the work of our foundation. Not what we did, not how we funded, but how we did the work. What was the engine that we were building to actually describe the value, the contribution that we were going to make to the change agenda? So that theory of philanthropy, I would encourage those in philanthropy to have a look at it, and I found it incredibly useful, as I said. People in not-for-profits, it gives you all the questions you should be asking people in philanthropy that you're seeking to engage with. It gives you the script to ask for you to get a pretty clear insight onto what extent the sorts of people that you're seeking to build relationships with are deeply thinking about their practice and are aligned with the sort of aspirations that you have. The other piece of work, got to move fast, the other piece of work that I think has been really interesting, I don't know how many of you have seen Rockefeller's new work on archetypes, which are really new ways of imagining and reframing and rethinking what philanthropy can and should be in the world. So in 2019, Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors developed the Philanthropy Framework, which basically, in many ways, replicates what Michael Quinn Patton's tool does. It asks you to talk about your charter, which is a lot more than just your mission and vision. The charter, what your scope is, how you make decisions. It asks you to clarify your social impact. And it asks what's the operational model that you need to build in order to deliver on impact. Together, it defines a philanthropy's culture, it informs its structure and shape and how it carries out its strategy. And it was developed to help philanthropic entities better assess, validate or crystallise identity, structure and approaches, align, very importantly, we're going to talk to this directly in a moment, trustees, board and staff around core concepts and values. That's another huge gap, I think, in what's happening in philanthropy at the moment. Boards and staff are not aligned around those fundamental things that dictate who you are, what you are and what you're doing in the world. It manages organisational inflection points such as leadership transitions. It asks you to think about how you allocate your financial and non-financial resources. And it really helps you also, and this is the thing that I think is most useful about it, is it asks you to look at where you are currently and then describe some states that you might want to move to as you deeply think about what impact looks like. So essentially, once again, I really suggest that you connect with it. I found it very useful in framing how the Menzies Foundation is thinking about the work that we're doing. And really, as I said, forcing us to clarify the work and the way that we're thinking about and going about doing that work. There are basically 8 archetypes. And for not-for-profits, once again, you understanding what these are and understanding how you might craft your requests for support and how you see yourself in partnership or collaboration with the philanthropic entities that you want to work with lies absolutely at the heart of the new type of collaborative practice that's really an absolute essential requirement if we're going to make a difference in the world. I know many of you are probably sitting there quite cynically thinking, well, you know, philanthropy doesn't work that way. You know, I try and connect with philanthropists and we have conversations about how they might apply as a grant, and there's, you know, considerable barriers between that exchange. It's about, you know, the power dynamic's not what it ought to be. Well, you know, for everybody sitting in this room, I think that's the thing we have to step into, acknowledge and change. We have to get the money off the table and have far more specific conversations about what it is we're trying to create, what the value is we're trying to create in the world, what the impact agenda is, and then work constructively to craft what that collaboration, those relationships look like. And these archetypes, I think, are a way of expanding on that conversation. So talent agencies are those foundations that seek out to strengthen and promote leading individual or organisational change agents who are closest to the issue. They focus more on potential than on programmatic goals or strategies. They back people. Think tanks apply in-house expertise and research to design policy or systemic solutions, then introduces, markets, socialises the approach to others and finds implementers to those solutions. Campaign managers pull together diverse sets of players and look for solutions that create collaborative funding vehicles. Field builders launches for significantly strengthening institutions to fill a gap and create robust, vibrant ecosystems needing to address a large challenge. And I could go on. Venture capitalists provide unrestricted funding to organisations. Designers leverage expertise to design programs and approaches. Underwriters provide big bet support for major initiatives, and sowers provide a huge and diverse range of grants. We have many, many sowers in the Australian philanthropy landscape. We need more of some of these other agents. But much more importantly, we need careful thought about the role that you're going to play and how and why that value and the impact that that's going to have. So once again, and I'm not going to go through all these in detail, but in the paper, why this is such a useful tool is it really has in the paper a whole defined set of core attributes that explains how you fund, the way that you need to think about how you craft those sorts of approaches. And I think what it really sets out, which is what Rockefeller is saying, is the challenges in that the world faces, the type of ways we need to think about impact, the type of ways we need to think about holding ourselves to account for the impact that we want to have in the world, really require us to work in new and different ways, to have much deeper conversations about actually what our practice model is, how we do operate, what our funding does provide, how that funding fits into the ecosystem in a way that we can be cognizant of its contribution. And these sorts of things give you that opportunity. So what Rockefeller really argues is that the world requires a new and different approach, and this sort of deeper analysis, this deeper way of thinking about who you are and what you are, allows you to better align existing resources, skill sets and approaches. It allows you to map potential gaps in your own internal capabilities and in the external changes that must be addressed, so what your partners need. It brings in that whole conversation in philanthropy about pay what it takes, about capacity building, about those sorts of things. It allows for thoughtful strategic pivots. And if there's one thing the Australian philanthropy landscape needs is more thoughtful strategic pivots, which includes scaling up or spending down. It ensures that the different operating archetypes employed by an organisation complement one another. So, you know, there's enormous diversity in philanthropy. And once again, to the people sitting in this room, we have to find ways to work together better. We're all a different part. Can we have some more clicks for that, please? We're all a different part of the system. We all bring a different disposition, a different aspiration, but there is so much power in our alignment and in working with not-for-profits and others to see what that looks like and how that actually is best positioned for impact. It illuminates tensions in how philanthropy views itself and how it actually works. Got to have more clicks for that, because there's a lot of self-congratulation, but how and to what extent are we holding ourselves accountable? How much are we moving out of our ivory towers? How much are we seeking alignment and holding ourselves to account? It addresses inequity and inclusion, and it designs impact assessment methods that link to the Foundation's operating approach. So it asks that you assess the impact you're having with clarity around the sort of role that you're playing. And just to be very clear, you know, in no way am I suggesting that it's inappropriate for some philanthropy to want to be a sower, to want to do a large number of grants to a whole range of organisations for small amounts of money in a short-term basis. There's an absolute need for that. But it's inappropriate to say you're doing that and to expect the sort of acquittal and the sort of relationship building that, there's more clicks, I love that, the relationship building that's required if you're working at a systems level. And much more importantly, your small grants are an amazing innovation pipeline for someone that wants to work at systems level. So how are you thinking about the relationships between and within as much as you're thinking about your own practice? And for not-for-profits out there, how are you seeing how this coalesces? How are you moving around the sort of role that you're playing in the challenges that you're addressing and thinking beyond your own organisation's programmatic needs to define the future that you want? Because it's not just about philanthropy. To be honest, I've tried for 10 years to get philanthropy to step up to this sort of ambition. But in some ways, I also think there's a huge onus on not-for-profits, and I see Sarah sitting here on corporate philanthropy to actually be really instrumental in thinking about what it brings to this, in also contributing and developing platforms that engage philanthropy in new ways rather than just being about a grant ask. So in the short time I've got available, because I'm running out of time, I just wanted to quickly show you some of the ways we've been thinking about this at the Menzies Foundation. Now, I have to tell you, I've got Catherine Greiner sitting here in the audience, and I hope Francis is here, but this has been a wild and interesting ride, because we're definitely focused on systems level change, and it comes with lots of pluses and lots of minuses, but we've spent a lot of time thinking about our engine, a lot of time about how we do. So just in summary, we basically want to build a leadership movement, pivoting people to the greater good. We do that by identifying leadership challenges, and we want to work systems level platforms to address that. And then we take all of those things that we're working in leadership to say, well, what is the emerging insights around leadership today, and how can we elevate those insights into the national discourse? All our incubators are built on multi-sector collaborations, built around impact and evaluation frameworks that codify and capture insights that underpin our strategy. And then we look for systems play, and we use the sort of collective impact framing to basically build those incubators. So this is basically what our model is. As I said, we have these areas of interest, these initiatives. In many other foundations, they're program areas. They become the learning pits about what leadership is, and then we take those things, we work at systems change level around those buckets that are described there, and our ultimate aim is to, as I said, build or contribute to a leadership movement, pivoting people to the greater good. We've thought deeply about the archetypes that sit underneath our program, and we hold ourselves to account for those archetypes. Now, in those simple sentences, what I've said to you, I've told you not only what we do, our vision and mission, build a leadership movement that contributes to the greater good, I've told you explicitly about how we do it. We build system incubators based on multi-sector collaborations that are built around impact and evaluation frameworks that we use to continue to develop the strategies and codify. Anybody that wants to work with me, I can tell you exactly what that looks like and how it works. Do you know what I mean? It's not we're interested in 5 program areas and we run a small grants program, a medium grants program and a large grants program. That doesn't get where we need to get to. So as I said, what we do is we have that as our strategic and impact evaluation frameworks that sit at the heart. But the big thing for us, I said to my board said to me, well, how are you going to know, what difference are you going to make in the world? How are you thinking about the value? What impact? You know, this is all nebulous and not centred in anything that's real. What is the difference that you're going to make in the world? So the Menzies Foundation team went away and we thought very long and hard about that. And we're very proud, as a result of that really deep thinking about how I could demonstrate to the board that it was worth taking the punt to do extraordinary things and to be adventurous, which I'll show you in a minute, was we came up with the Menzies viral coefficient model. And the Menzies viral coefficient model, I said to the board, this is the one metric that you have to hold me to accountable to for me to be able to show you how we are building a leadership movement for the greater good. And they all looked at me like I was mad. And they said, what is the Menzies viral coefficient model? And the Menzies viral coefficient model, the viral coefficient is about virility. The viral coefficient asks me, I've said to the board, asks me to be cognizant of not only every person that the foundation connects to, but also to have line of sight between every person that that person connects to and that person connects to. It's about usability, and Sarah Jenkins, our strategic communication manager, will show you how we're doing it, how we're actually capturing that data. But what's fundamental, and the point I want to make today, is I can show my board, we're working on it in time, I can show my board every transaction that anybody has with any work we do at this level around our initiatives, and how that is captured globally in terms of how we're contributing to a leadership movement more generally. From every advertisement we put out, from every piece of collateral we do, from every program we do, everything at the Menzies Foundation we do is pivoted around the greater good purpose and people's alignment to building their capacity to step into that. What the viral coefficient does, it has fundamentally transformed how the foundation thinks about what it funds and how it funds. It's fundamentally changed the way we think about how we're delivering our impact and our purpose. And it came about because my board said to me, tell me how I'm going to know that you're making a difference in the world. Not how many grants you're making or how many initiatives you have or how much money you're spending, because let me tell you, it's not about the money. Tell me what impact you're having in the world. And the two things that I've demonstrated to you, these two tools, the theory of philanthropy and I think Rockefeller's archetypes, can really help you get under the bonnet of that to really understand. Now, I've just got a couple of quick case studies I want to run through just to show you what the implications of that are. So today we're going to talk about with these pillars that I think absolutely underpin the sort of thinking that you need to bring in to have value and create impact in the world. I think that when I'm saying evaluating for impact, I think if you really interrogate your mission and your vision, you truly articulate what your contribution to the change you want to make in the world is, and you underpin that by deep clarification about the model that you're using, the approach you're using to do that, then I think these are some of the tools that you need to reframe and think about in terms of how you're putting them in your skill set to actually deliver the impact on your evaluation. I'm running out of time, so I'll be very quick with these, but I've just got a couple of case studies to show the way the Menzies Foundation thinking has been informed by this approach. So we basically have, we're doing some work with Indigenous women's entrepreneurship where 2019, I sat in the Asia Venture Philanthropy Network conference in Singapore, and the world was awash with extraordinary stories about supporting women in the developing world and the transformation of that, the implications of that for their communities. In those communities, that story is that if you support a woman or you help a woman to be entrepreneurial, it changes her life, her family's life and her community's life. And we were in that period back then in 2019, as there is now, huge concern about Indigenous communities, about the extent to which they're flourishing, about different ways that we can do it, and a huge uncertainty about how to move forward. So the Menzies Foundation came back and in addition to wanting to deeply understand Indigenous perspectives on the greater good, and let me tell you, the most profound illustrations I've had or articulation I've had of the greater good is sitting around campfires with these women who speak through their trauma but talk about their responsibilities to their families, their communities and the earth. The most simple, the most plain, the most heartfelt articulation of the greater good. And just so basically what happened is we did due diligence, we came back and we looked for a collaboration team. We did everything we possibly could to fund the in-between to set up the collaborations. We worked to find Indigenous women and to build up their organisations and their capacity to be sitting at the heart of our initiative. Magdana Makers was born, a business club with 130 women across the Kimberley. We went to another Indigenous evaluation and impact organisation, and the foundation supported the development of the impact and evaluation framework in concert with those women. It took a year and a half. It had 1 million turns backwards and forwards. It wasn't a project that was defined by deliverables. It was seen as absolutely fundamental and inherent to the value of the work that we were creating, to building the capacity of those women. We've now, in addition to that, we spun out a partnership with First Australians Capital, using an amazing Indigenous consultant in Sydney to an ecosystem mapping piece of trauma, capital and Indigenous entrepreneurial female activity in rural and remote Australia, and bringing those things together. We didn't fund that on the basis of a program. We sat in the collaboration as a partner. We built out what was possible. We introduced all sorts of people that might not necessarily have come into that picture, and we brokered those relationships. We're in the process of building out a tribe. As part of the leadership for the greater good, we want at least 1,000 women, and I hope some of these women are in the room here, are going to stand next to our Indigenous Magdana Makers, and Magdana is tomorrow makers. I love the fact that those women describe themselves as tomorrow makers, sitting up in Kimberley. We're going to build a tribe to support them. We've just partnered with Criterion to do a global best practice analysis of blended capital models that meld impact bonds, impact investment vehicles and new ways, Sarah, going to love this, of shared value, looking at how we might monetise flourishing communities because the world acknowledges there's a gap around that. We're going to bring that practice to Australia. And then, God love Sam, who's going to speak in a minute. We're going to sit with Sam, we're going to design a new tool. And the thing about the foundation has done across that whole spectrum of work is we sit at the table as a collaborator. We respond to the challenges. We're there when things don't work. We do everything we can to see the points of connection, to broker new relationships, to bring new expertises into these spaces. And the way we think about evaluating for impact is we tell stories like that, if that makes sense. The story isn't the program we funded or the organisation that we supported or the one thing we did. It's what we do across the dimensions in entirety. In science entrepreneurship, we started with a blank sheet of paper. Paper giants, Chris is going to talk to you, did some due diligence, prepared a report working with science entrepreneurs about why Australia had struggled to commercialise science successfully. We then found partners to collaborate with. The first one fell over because it got defunded. My board said, forge on, because as I said, that's the way we work. We accept failure, we countenance failure, we look to learn from failure. We formed a new relationship with the MedTech Actuator. Once again, I made 100 phone calls to everybody I knew in social impact investment in Australia to try and find somebody to build me a fund for nascent science entrepreneurs. I finally found Bright Light. Hopefully, we can't announce it yet, Sam, but hopefully the investment of the foundation, funding the program, funding the development of the model, being an early investor in the model means that our contribution is going to land a $50 to $150 million impact investment fund for nascent science entrepreneurs. But once again, a fundamentally different way of thinking about evaluating for impact. Not programmatic, not one relationship, multidimensional, global in implication and opportunity. These are the things that I think move us more towards the impact agenda. Finally, our school leadership incubator. You're going to learn from Kerry today. Incubation is a major opportunity for philanthropy to build containers for change that fund all the elements. We did the due diligence. We built the collaboration. We designed an intervention, built around lived experience again. We've now pivoted to a heads of agreement with a Silicon Valley ed tech player because it's not always going to government and going to the departments that the solution is. We saw a major opportunity for an ed tech play that completely changed the way school leadership's thought about. And once again, we were the ones, Tony said he's my board, introduced me to someone in Silicon Valley who was working on an ed tech application. The foundation's funding the development of this tool that we think potentially not only in Australia but globally can reimagine the way that school leaders build collective efficacy in their schools. But once again, impact not thought about in terms of an outcome or a report, but in terms of how you bring all that you are in terms of what your opportunity is as a philanthropist, how you bring your networks, your resources, your capacity to connect, as I said, globally and regionally, your capacity to bring people to the table, your capacity to build and pay for the things that sit in the in-between can lead to powerful results. And finally, just quickly in community resilience, about 4 different programs came together for us now to look at how DAOs might transform communities. So once again, criterion of funding, a global piece for us on Web3 finance and community resilience. Once again, that's going to be the piece that builds on the work that we're doing around deliberative democracy, the way we think about what innovation looks like, the way we fund innovation. So in essence, what I really want to say, and to finish, before I ask Catherine to come to the stage, because governance is such a key to this, one of the other people in Chicago that was quite extraordinary was Dr. Shane Gigwright, who's a professor of Africana Studies at San Francisco State University and a preacher. And he brought the house down, let me tell you, in ways that I think gave enormous insight into the way we need to think about this work, the way we need to move out of what we know into what we want to become, the way we need to sit comfortably in complexity, in uncertainty, the way we need to accept that multiple expertises are the answer and we can't be the experts in everything, the way we need to move away from hierarchy to collaboration. He said in his new book, which is an amazing book, Reimagining Justice, Reimagining Ourselves, he asked us to do, the room, the 600 people, and I'm going to ask you to do that, the people sitting in this room today. He said, could we do 4 things? There are 4 pivots that are absolutely fundamental to thinking and working in new ways. The first, he said, was about awareness. He said, so many of us hold our lens up in terms of how we see the world. We see the world through our lens, and he specifically asks us to hold up a mirror. And I ask you to do that today. Who are you? What are you? How are you contributing? How much are you getting out beyond what you are and what you know to forge new ways of thinking and working? He also talked about the absolute fundamental importance of connection, how we must move from transactional to transformational. So much of the nature and the nexus between philanthropy and not-for-profits is transactional rather than transformational. He spoke about vision, how we've got to stop talking about the problems and move to the possibility. And the possibility is much broader in breadth. It's much bigger as a concept, but it's the place where new ways of thinking and working can emerge. And most importantly, he talked about presence. He said how fundamental it is that we move from hustle to flow. And by that he meant less focus on grant applications, less focus on grant-making procedures, let's focus on the process and much more focus on the flow. Can we build out the places that we can sit in deep collaboration, in deep uncertainty to forge new ways of connecting? Can philanthropy think about the power that offers this room in terms of collaboratively, jointly and with vision and ambition addressing many of the challenges that we sit with in our day-to-day work? So that's my contribution to the debate and my framing for evaluation and impact. I've asked, and I'm just so grateful to Catherine for joining us today. Catherine, can you come up on stage?